And we're live. Welcome to another edition of Life is People. And we were just saying before we went live about how much the world has changed and how crazy that this whole spinning rock that we live on has spun in the last sort of 20 years in our lifetime. So well, that's maybe a sort of starting point for this conversation. But before I go any further, it's a great honour and pleasure, really, and to have tonight's guest on the podcast, because it's as I was saying to him before we went live, I've had many conversations about the content you produce, and I was saying our connection really began really through the Twins of the Ceiling Demons. Now maybe that's a good place to sort of start, where maybe where your connection with the Demons and the Ceiling Demons came with. But before we do go any further, it's really a pleasure to have you. And how are you doing tonight anyway, Paul?
Yeah, I'm good. I'm very nervous, but I'm good. Yeah, nervous but looking forward to it. Yeah.
So, like I say, you told me before we went live, but where did your connection with the Ceiling Demons first arise?
Well, I started writing, and it was one of those bizarre sort of chance encounters that brought it along. But I started writing for Louder Than More, the online music mag, and that's probably about 4 years ago now. And maybe about 12 months into that, I think one of the lads, one of the Twins, got in touch with me with some of their music. Would I like to listen to it? Would I like to review it? And I must admit, sort of hip hop, it wasn't really my thing. I'm very open to all music, and I'll listen to anything. And I'll give a view on everything. But it wasn't a genre that I was sort of particularly, yeah, this is brilliant. But there was something about the Ceiling Demons that just struck a chord. There's just something about it that makes them very original. I particularly liked the regional accent. It was sort of quite close in terms of where we are in the country. I'm in Lancashire, there in Yorkshire, but there was something quite very unique about hearing a very regional and a Northern England accent. Rapping and these great hip hop beats. So I just took to them straight away, and I think that was hopefully going to agree. There's a lot of love between us as well. We respect each other a lot. We like the things that each other do, and it's just carried on. I've watched very closely what they've been doing. I've reviewed a lot of the stuff, hopefully giving them some good exposure. Although having said that, it's not something they need, because lots of people are picking up on how good they are. And also Tom Robinson and Fresh on the Nets, is a big fan. I'm even in touch with a lady on Twitter in America who's a big fan as well, which is a bit of a curious thing. Somebody in America is into Yorkshire accents, doing hip hop. But no, they're good lads, and I say I've known them for about 3 years. I met them 2014. They came down to Rosendale, where I live, and they put on a gig as part of a mini festival that I did in a local park, and it was great to meet them. And as I say, we've stayed in touch ever since.
Well, like I said, that was my first sort of connection. How I first sort of came, my path across, your path, and it was, as I said, I spoke many times with the Twins about particularly your book, Hitting the Black Wall. Now, that's something I really want to explore with you tonight, and I think it's for everybody out there, we can tell people where to go out and to purchase at the end of this conversation. But I want to take this back to step one with regards to Hitting the Black Wall. Now, from my understanding, this is sort of formed from a collection of poems you've been writing over a long time. But what was what was the first sort of maybe epiphany moment, for want of a better word, that made you think, do you know what I'm going to do? I'm going to put this all together and actually put it in a paperback form. Because from someone, like, I'll give you a bit of background. I mean, I've done a bit of writing in my time, but I know how difficult it is to sort of formulate something into a book form, and then going through the difficult process of actually trying to get that out and actually making it into a physical copy that someone can actually put in their hand. So what was the moment you thought, do you know, I'm going to step away from just doing this as a group of poems and into actually starting the process of actually putting that through to a book?
It's quite a long story, if you've got the time.
Right, go ahead.
When I was a teenager, I sort of grew up in the early teens, in the early 80s, and I grew up, with all this fantastic pop music that was around, and I still actually think it was probably the last great sort of movement in music in this country. I don't really think there's been anything since the early 80s, to be fair. But I had this sort of this dream of being a pop star. You know, and we're talking sort of maybe 15, 16, 17-year-old, maybe a bit older. I had this dream of being a pop star. I had a little Casio keyboard, and I used to write words down, and have a bash at sort of writing some songs. But I quickly realised that I couldn't sing, I couldn't play the keyboard, and that sort of ambition sort of disappeared very, very quickly. But I still had sort of these songs that I started writing, and I sort of thought, well, rather than sort of try and make myself into a pop star, let's start making it into poetry. So at the age of about 19, I started writing poetry, and it was one of those things where I sort of dreamed of having a book, and I tried a few publishers, and I sort of turned away by quite a lot of publishers just for single poems. And for a long time I gave up on it, and then maybe about 10, 15 years ago, I started approaching some of these self-publishing houses. I managed to get the odd one or two published in some compilation books, which again was a great thing. There's nothing better with something like that than actually having a physical book, in your hand to look at. And sort of time passed again, and then maybe a couple of years ago, through people that I've sort of found on Twitter, and authors that I find on Twitter. There's one lady in particular called Lynn Gerard, who goes on under the handle of Grumbling Gargoyle on Twitter, writes some fantastic poetry. And I thought, sod this, I'm not getting any younger. I was 47, I think, at the time. I thought, I'll approach a publisher, see if they're interested in some of my poems. And straight away, they said they were. I thought, wow, this is amazing. So, things sort of progressed quite quickly, and middle of last July, I had my first collection published. So it was something that theoretically had sort of been 30 years in the making, but there was a big long gap in between before me sort of really just forgetting about it, not really bothering. And then I thought, well, why not? What have I got to lose? I do have this theory of you don't ask, you don't get. And if you ask something, somebody says no, so what? So like I say, I give it a go, and lo and behold, this collection came together. So I concentrated on the first one, Hitting the Black Wall. I've used as a metaphor for depression. It's something I've sort of suffered with, as far as I know, from my late teens. As many people know that suffer from depression, it never goes away. It's sometimes easier to cope with. It's sometimes a lot worse. But I think you've got it for the rest of your life, once you have it. So I concentrated on the depression angle. I've got about 60 poems in this book, which are dark about depression, dark about loneliness, about loss of love. It's not particularly happy reading sometimes. It can be quite direct. But it's one of those things you sort of want to get out of your system, And nowadays, with everything being virtual and everything being online, having a physical book that's just mine was really something. It's sort of quite a personal achievement, really sort of a big sort of milestone in my life, really. And like I say, it's been 30 years in the making, theoretically. But it's brilliant to have it out there, and if people pick it up, and if people like it, if people moved, if it provokes people, because a lot of people say it's quite provocative stuff. Some of it, like I say, is quite hard reading, but if people evoke some feeling from it, then to me it's sort of job done, and I'm very proud of it. I'm really pleased that I sort of decided to do something about it at long last.
Well, let's take this back to step one, because I'm always fascinated about the creative process, because I think it's something that's not spoken upon a great deal, and I think it's an essential element that I think needs to be shed a light upon. So, I mean, again, I'll give you my reflection. I very much write I have notepads, and I'll almost keep it with me as a kind of body armor, really. If I wake up with me, I have a notepad beside me to draw or to write. So I have a process of writing with hand on ink I've spoken to many creative people who have all different many forms. So let's take this back to step one. When you have the construct of writing, the words that are forming in your head, do you put this out through a keyboard, or are you doing hand on, pen on paper? I mean, what is your very?
It's a bit of both. I mean, you go back to the beginning when I started writing, it was obviously pen and paper, because this wonderful world wide web that we live in now, didn't exist. But it's a bit of both now. I find I'm not the sort of person, and I don't know whether this is common. I can't sort of sit down at a desk and write. I'm going to write a poem. It can come at any time. I may be influenced by a line in a song. I might be influenced by a scene in a film. I may even get ideas from this conversation tonight about writing a poem. It can just be any one thing, or it can be one line that I sort of think of. And many times I've had one line written down quite literally for years without using it, and then there'll come a time where that line comes into a poem. So it can be a very long process. I have written a couple of poems that I've sort of sat down with an idea, and the whole thing is just flawed. And there's one poem in particular that I've written that I actually don't remember writing. It sounds a really bizarre thing to say, but it just sort of completely flawed, and it's probably one of my favourite pieces as well. So it can vary. It can vary. I might have lines written down, like I say, for a long time. I might have this theme that I want to write about, and so trot something out. It may be 20 lines long. It might just be 2 or 3. It's about feeling. It's about emotion, and it's about getting that out. And for somebody that does suffer from depression, getting rid of some of those feelings sometimes, even if it's just on paper, is a very, very good tonic.
I completely concur with that, and I think this is one of the things that this is why I was trying to allude to you about how you do it, because I think there's a great actual, like you said, a cathartic moment of actually putting something on a piece of paper, and you feel like you're just shedding something, and like you say, and then from that moment onwards, I mean, I don't know what you're like, but I kind of feel like when I've ever put anything to paper, whether it's artwork or writing or anything, I kind of like I turn away from it, and I don't want to look at it again, and I just sort of feel on to the next one. I mean, is that a similar experience you have?
It's interesting you say that, because when I was sort of decided to compile this book, I was going back through a lot of stuff that I've written, and I've forgotten a lot of it. It's sort of, like I say, it's written down, it's sort of out of the system, and it's sort of shelved away. So it was only when I was going to put the book together that I realised some of the stuff I'd completely forgotten about. And brought back a lot of memories. It's not all autobiographical that I do. Quite a lot of it is complete fiction. And what I sort of like about a lot of it is somebody will maybe pick up a piece and read it and believe that it's true when it's completely fabricated, and that's a big buzz as well. Somebody actually believing what I've written is sort of real life, and it's just sort of come from up here. But it's been interesting. It's been an interesting sort of journey back through my past as well, and sort of reliving some of the feelings and some of the emotions that obviously I had when I was writing some of that poetry. And again, sort of, pardon the expression, facing those demons, talking about demons, sort of facing those demons again. Like I say, it's very cathartic, and it's good to sort of take it in and sort of be able to deal with it. Whereas once upon a time, writing the poetry was because you couldn't deal with it. Going back to it all these years later, it's sort of like facing up to it again, and sort of filing it away almost. It's it's an interesting experience.
No, I mean, I think this is a real separation, because I think it's a fascinating concept that, and I've spoken to many people who do, and I don't. Again, this is a question to you. I don't know whether you do open mic, and you do some of your poems in an open mic form. But if there is, there must be because I've never done that. I've written many poems and many pieces of writing, but I would to me, to stand up on the stage and speak it to anyone, that would fill me with more dread than anything else on this planet. So I think that when I'm in that moment of writing, I always sort of feel, I know it's always going to be put in a page, like I said, and I'm going to leave it. But there must be a different mindset for someone if you know that there could be an eventuality that you're going to be stood in front of a group of people and saying these words, or doesn't that come into the thought process at all. And I say this because it's not something I've ever, in my creative process of writing, I've ever come across. But I don't know if it's something you experience when you write yours. Is there ever a crossover and you think, oh, okay, some of this is going to go out to the public, so I can't be this raw, or I know this can be more really raw because it's just going to go out on pages and almost I can leave it behind. Is that something that you wrestle with at all?
It didn't, and in a way, writing the poetry, like I say, is a way of getting your feelings out, and sometimes without having to talk to people, it's a good way of expressing your feelings. And I'm actually quite a socially inadequate person. You know, I'm not good at standing up and talking to people, and when I do, it's on pure adrenaline and probably fear that I do it. But it's an interesting thing you say, because when I launched the book last July, we launched it locally in the museum, and I said to my wife only a few days before, you know, excuse me, I said, do you think I'm going to have to sort of stand up and read something? And she sort of laughed at me and said, you know, gosh, you know, it's your book, you know, people are coming along to hear from it, you know. And it was literally quite literally a couple of days before, it actually scared the shit out of me, you know, that I might have to sort of stand there and read some poetry to people. I think I probably just expected to go along and sit in a corner with some books and expect people to come along and, you know, kind of buy a copy. Never crossing my mind that I might actually have to stand up and explain what it was about and read some of the stuff. And I did, and I probably rambled quite a lot, and I'm probably aware I'm doing that now. And I think this is this fear of talking, this sort of, you know, this inadequacy. I think that I think I have. You know, I do find it difficult to sort of address people and groups of people. But no, it's not something I ever thought about when I was writing. I mean, probably happened all too late, as I say, on the book launch. But, you know, I realised I probably have to say something. But I think it's all, like I say, it's all done on fear and adrenaline. I think, which in itself is probably a good thing, because it's all very spur of the moment and very intense as well. You know, we're having to sort of make something up and sort of blag your way along, you know. But no, it's an interesting point, but it never ever crossed my mind that I'd have to sort of read in front of people, which is very bizarre.
Yeah, I say this because I personally, in my own thought process, of all the creative elements there are, you know, painting, music, and I think you've spoken upon in what you just said, because poetry in its true elemental form is, like you said, it's basically just expressing of human pure emotion onto a piece of paper. I think for that reason you're saying it is the most heartfelt thing. So I think it's the most difficult one. That's what I'm saying, to go out and express into the public domain a lot, because I mean, as I say, an artist and a filmmaker, we can just shove it into another domain and leave alone. But as you say, it's a very different thing, because I mean, I'll give you an example. I don't even like going back and reading my old works, because it's some of them I like you just said, they cut me to the soul, and I think, and I think it is really powerful, and that's why I think it is good to do, because as I've always thought this, and this is, I think, the power of what we're seeing in our lifetime, is that, you know, I remember when I wrote things, I'm sure you felt the same. There's probably been times you sat in that room by yourself and you think, I'm the only person on this planet feeling this, and you wrote it out, and you probably found this through the experience of putting your book out, that what you're feeling and what you're expressing on that paper, countless other people go through. But that's the discipline of being a creative person, isn't it? Is to basically, and again, this is my sort of leading question to you, is, which I kind of really wanted to, you know, I was trying to sort of dig into the first part of it, is that how do you overcome this, especially if you're someone, you know, who, like many creative people, we're outsiders and we tend to be very much reclusive kind of people, and then you add into, like you say, mental illnesses and depressions and stuff. So it's that, how this is the inspiring piece. How did you? It's that overcoming. It's that. How do you? That moment of like, oh, okay, I know this is all, the fear that I could be confronting, but you. And that's what I'm saying. That's why I was relating to that speaking into public, because you're putting your soul, your heart, and literally on the paper. You're not like being an artist and saying, "Well, look, there you go, people." You interpret what I'm trying to say. You're actually saying it there in black on white. This is some of my deepest heartfelt moments. So it's how did you overcome that fear? Because I think that's, to me, something I think needs to really be spoken upon in the current world we live in, where we don't see. That's the same, dude. We're of a certain age, and hey, I mean, I can relate to it completely. We're not the kind of generation where it grew up with, like, if I'd gone to my careers teacher, and I'm sure you're the same, and said, what do you think you'll be doing when you're in mid-40s? He'd be like, oh, I'll be an artist or a poet. They would be like, oh, come on, though, get a sensible job. So, that the world hasn't changed that much, but I'm sure there's lots of people that need that inspiration. So is taken from people like yourself who have taken that step, and that that's what's been done. You've got a book in print, people can go out buy that. So how did you overcome that fear? I mean, it's I know you're saying you told me about the pathway you went down, but what was the drive to overcome that fear, especially from the angle you're coming from, like you said, from the depression angle? I mean, and then to go out and, as I said, and put those heartfelt words and to put them into the public domain. What do you think was the one thing that made you overcome that fear?
I think initially when I started writing a lot of my stuff, it was probably a cry for help. I think I got a lot of it, and putting it down on paper. As I say, it's sort of getting it out of your system, and it was almost, again, going back to the sort of social inadequate. It's almost like talking to somebody, but you put it down on paper rather than sort of expressing to somebody. But for many years, these poems, and I've maybe written, I don't know, 250, 300 poems. Very few people actually saw them. I could probably count on one hand the number of people that I showed this poetry to. So even though I was sort of getting that feeling out, I was still very reserved and fearful, I suppose, of sharing that poetry with people. Whether it was embarrassment, whether it was sort of fear of people saying that's crap, the fear of rejection, I don't know, but it was always something that sort of very, very personal that I only wanted to share with very close people. And I don't know whether it's an age thing, as you get older, that you sort of learn to appreciate smaller things in life. I mean, even now, you sort of learn to appreciate that, you're of a certain age. You appreciate that you've got kids, you've got a wife, you appreciate you've got a home. You appreciate that you wake up in the morning sometimes. You know what I mean? And it might sound a silly thing to say, but I think as you get older, you do start to think of things like that. So I think wanting to do a full book of my poetry was sort of the next step in that. Look, I'm this age, I've done all this poetry. Just get it out. What do I care, sort of thing. The worst thing people can say is I don't like it. And that was really my sort of take on it. If people don't like it, they don't like it. If they like it, brilliant. And like I said, quite a lot of it is fictional. It can be sparked off by a feeling I had, but it can be something, then that grows into something, about a made-up character or made-up characters. But again, it's this overactive imagination. I just wanted to get it out there, and sort of having the book there, having it released, having people read it and say, bloody hell, Paul, as good as this. It's a great feeling, and that in itself has been a good tonic in itself. People saying that. So just sort of getting it out. I think it's born out of fear, like I say, fear and that sort of adrenaline, and just wanted to share it with people.
Do you know what I find fascinating? And I think it's I think that it's almost the root of, and I, you know, and I think we're both in the same sort of generation to sort of feel this. I feel the whole element of actually what someone like yourself does and put, you know, poem, poetry. I don't even like the word. I mean, there's so many words in this world that are just, to me, when I hear the word poems and poetry, it just, because of the education system that we've been put through, you tend to think of these romantic poets sat there, you know, and contemplating metaphysical in life, or there's some, you know, gritty kind of working class hero, or there's some sort of middle class person going into the back streets of London and saying how terrible the poetry is, and it's kind of the whole word is almost corrupted, and I think it's fascinating what it is, because, and it's like the whole word that I think, like, you know, because it's, for instance, if you go to your Twitter page, you'll see like dark poetry, and it's almost like you feel you have to categorize the word poetry and then into darkness. And I think it's like a lot of things. It's what I love about people like yourself, wordsmiths, as I think that what you really are, is you're playing with the ideas of what everything is. Because, for instance, everybody's got of what a poet is and what poems are. Everybody generally has an idea of what depression is, and I've always thought, why do we have to look at things like depression and poetry in these ways? Why do we have to see depression, for instance, as a negative? I've often seen that the most creative people would be deemed as at school, dude. If I thought this, if I'd been at school now, they would have stuck me on Ritalin straight away. They've gone, oh, you know, I mean, it's scary, the world we live in. And then you think, you know, they're kind of, you got this, and hey, if the person's getting them on by, maybe we need to redefine all these words like depression and poetry and artist and all this, and say, hey, they're just human beings who are expressing themselves. Because that's what I'm trying to say. I don't count you as in the same category at all as some sort of, you know, Dad, I'll be truthful. You're not some guy who's sat in an ivory place in some university, you know, writing short proses about flowers and the metaphorical meanings of the historical meanings of light and stuff. No, you're being real. But that's the whole point. I think this is the power of people like yourself, and what we do is you're standing up and saying, hey, look. Just because the world has certain definitions, I mean, even if you take it to a broader level, I mean, just in our lifetimes, and I don't even know how it is now, just having accents. I mean, just to sort of get up and say, like you began this conversation with. That's what I love about the people like the twins. Just to stand up and say, "Hey, I'm from this part of the world, and this is what I grew up, and this is who I can speak." It's redefining everything, and this is the power that people like you who are putting the people who are putting words onto paper, to me, have the greatest power. It's that whole thing about the pen is mightier than any sword. And I know it's become a cliche, but it really does, because if you think about where we've got to in this culture, that's come from people writing stuff on paper that was disruptive. You know, right from the printing press right through to all the disruptive writers and stuff like this. And this is the power that we have. And I think it goes back to, which is what I hope, you know, I love about, you know, highlighting people like yourself, because you know, to me, it'd be a great goal that if I get to my dying deathbed, that we've redefined the word poetry, or even better, let's ditch the word poetry.
Yeah, that's some good points there. I mean, like I say, you mentioned poetry. I think people just think, you know, flowers and butterflies and fluffy bunnies, you know, and that, I think, I find is the first stumbling block really in trying to get people interested in poetry. And as you said, you know, on the Twitter account, I've had to use the hashtags along with poetry, dark poetry, depression, punk poetry, Scandinavian, you know, just to try and get people to sort of maybe think maybe it isn't, you know, trickling rivers and, you know, and grasshoppers, you know, it's so it's a difficult thing to overcome straight away, like I say, the word poetry, as is depression. Although I think a lot of people tend to call it mental health nowadays, you know, which I think maybe makes people think a little bit more. I think mental health sounds a lot of a bigger thing than depression. You know, a lot of people misuse the word depression. You know, if somebody has a bad day, I've been depressed today, and it's okay. You haven't been depressed. You know, you don't know what depressed is if you know, if you just have one bad day. So yeah, it's like I say, the terminology of things, and getting people interested in reading it. And again, you said something about the poetry being everyday stuff, and I think it is. It deals with people losing loved ones. It deals with people having loved ones that die. It deals with suicide. It deals with car crashes. It deals with anything like that. And these are things that affect people. Really do affect people. I mean, I'm not the sort of person that has favourite poets. People say, "Who's your favourite poet?" I probably couldn't name that many. If I was to sort of pick people, to pick people like Philip Larkin, who sort of says it how it is, and swears a lot, and and it's sort of not offensive for offensive sake, but says things as they are. But even then, I probably couldn't tell you any of his poems. It's not a thing that I'm sort of big into, as a medium. It just happens that I like writing stuff of my own, and I think I have an individual style. The accent thing is interesting as well, because there's been a few people sort of heard some readings of my poetry. One was a woman in America who sort of sent a note back saying how much she loved the accent. And again, even people from the south of England, how much they like the regional bit. And I don't try and cover it. Like I said, this is who I am. I'm a Lancastrian lad, born and bred in it, and it's who I am. I don't want to hide what I am. I don't want to have to put on a false accent for people so that they can understand me, or so that they think I'm better than I am. It's because it won't be me. So yeah, it's about realism, I think. Interesting, actually, just going off a complete tangent. You said then, pen is mightier than the sword, and I love that line. Going back to what we talked about earlier about me growing up in the early 80s, a group called ABC, who are sort of still going now in one form or another. But Martin Fry was an amazing lyricist, and wrote some of the best pop songs, I think, of that generation. That actually still stand up to the test of time. But he had one line in one of his songs. I can't think which song it was, but it was "The pen is mightier than the sword. You're gonna hear my vocal cord." And I thought it brilliant. It sums it up. Not only does it rhyme, but what a great line! What a brilliant couplet to use. But you just reminded me of it then when you were talking. But no, it's about realism, I think. I want people to relate to some of the poetry. And if people can relate to it, then it may also help them deal with certain situations as well. Which I think is a good thing. It's I'm all for helping everybody. I have some sort of quite strong sort of socialist values, I suppose. Sharing and caring and living together sort of thing. So if people take something from my poetry, then job done. It's it's a big thrill, I suppose, that you can possibly help people out as well.
Yeah, and I think what you're speaking upon there, and this is something, again, in this world we live in, where they want to put everybody into one big category. But where you're born, where you're growing up, the culture, the people you're surrounded by, does affect a lot of who you are as a person. And you can just it's just shining across in all the words you're saying. Even for people who don't know, maybe what the part of the world you can just. It's illuminating from the words you're saying. Now, you live in a very, Lancashire is a part of the world. Now, the question I really want to focus on the Lancashire, because I think the people is one element. I think the history is another, because it's one of the things that, again, I think it really plays into, obviously it's going to shape you as a person. Is obviously just, how it was. I mean, it's one of the things that people maybe of a certain age or don't understand. But, man, life in the 80s up, Yorkshire and Lancashire was a very different place to what it is now in those two parts of the world, man. I mean, and I know you can speak upon that completely, but my what I really wanted to focus on this year, how much do you think the actual landscape and the actual, let's be real, the actual muck and rot rocks and just the wind and everything, actually, of Lancashire itself and the environment you're in, how much do you think that actually plays a part in who, the words you're putting on? Because it does, people might think, well, he's writing a lot about personal issues, but, you're not, wouldn't be described as a landscape poet or anything like that. But how much does that seep into what you write, or do you try to separate that completely and say, no, I focus solely on the people and emotion, and I try to cut that landscape and the nature out of it, or which side of that balance do you fall upon?
It can have an effect. Where I live in Lancashire, you had William Blake based Jerusalem on the part of Lancashire that I live in. The dark satanic mills and etc. And things like that, I think, do have bearings on people. Again, I'm thinking another 4 point when I just passed my 19th birthday, and I sort of, it was one of those, writing about, how shitty your life is, as a 19-year-old who's sort of suffering from what I now know was depression. But, there were lines in that one about the town hall clock running 2 minutes slow. So things like that were in my mind, because the town hall clock in Burnley did run 2 minutes slow. So it's obviously something I've noticed and focused on, and and it's crash. The town hall can't even get the time right. So yeah, it's probably something that has an effect subconsciously, and maybe something that I haven't really thought of before. And like you say, we do get the elements here. It's windy outside tonight. When we get the rain, we get the rain. You know what I mean? It's but yeah, it's an interesting thing. It's something I've not thought of, but I think it probably does have a bearing on it. Yeah, maybe if I lived in Jamaica or somewhere like that, I'd write very different poetry. I don't know, but it probably has some sort of influence. Yeah.
Well, that's what I'm saying. I think one of the undeniable influences, particularly, and I think this is I think black and white between the north and the south. I mean, there's a like I said, growing up in the northern part of England would have shaped anybody. I moved from. I did the opposite trick. I moved from from Sussex to Leeds in the late '80s, and it was a complete. I mean, it shaped me in every unbelievably. I wasn't some like this spoon in the mouth person, but I like you said, it was just a complete shape. How it shifted my mind. So that can't be escaped from, because you do see this in reflections of your stuff. And I was just reading one again, I can't remember exactly the name for it, but you talk about for instance, the Hillsborough one and the Justice for the 96. See, that stuff shapes people in the northern part of England far more than it does if you're in some sort of well-off part of Kensington, because they don't give a toss about down there. So I think where the part of the way you have grown up has obviously shaped you, because it's not only your the experiences you've had. I mean, that's what I'm saying. When we what it was like in that part of the world when we were growing up, but just your culture. I mean, you have go back. I mean, the parts of where you only go back 4 or 5 generations, and everybody who was in basically your part of the world and in Yorkshire and stuff was all shipped in. It was all factory work and stuff like this, and it's amazing. That's what I try to say. But you definitely get reflections. I mean, as much as I could read your work, and as I was saying, it may not by reading go, okay, he's based in Lancashire, but I could definitely tell you as okay, there's elements of that Lancashire pouring through, as I would tell if I was reading something from Scotland, go, okay, there's an element of Scotland pouring through, because I think there's just that whole is that you can't escape who you've been grown up with and the culture and the values around it. And I think that's again, it's a duality that I think all creative people are always trying to do, and it's a very difficult one. And my question to you is, how do you face that discipline of not just being stuck in an echo chamber? Because I think it's very difficult, very easy for creative people to think, okay, I want to separate myself and be an outsider, but then it's so easy just to fall into the trap of just being an echo chamber and just go, oh, okay, well, I know that's going to play really well to that audience, and I'm not going to say anything that's going to rock that boat. So I mean, it's all part of that element, which I say I think maybe doesn't play as much from someone from your part of the world and Yorkshire than it did with some very stereotypical kind of, you know, person sat in the middle of Chelsea trying to write about poetry about the metaphysical flowers, because there's a reality to it, because it's that whole thing, you know. I mean, it's that whole, you know, the further up north you get, the more honest people get, and you know, people are going to tell you. I don't know. I mean, that's part of the thing. I mean, I'd imagine when people are going to come up to you in Lancashire and Yorkshire and stuff like that, where you're surrounded, people aren't going to, you know, blow smoke up your ass. They're going to tell you, you know, that was good, that wasn't good, or that affected me, and that's, I think, must be really refreshing from a creative point of view.
Yeah, it is. Yeah, it's like I say, you know, you're very individual. It is surprising for such a small country how big, you know, how much things change from north to south. You know, you sort of maybe 3 or 4 hours drive away, and it can be a world apart sometimes. And again, you know, further north as well. You know, it does reflect on who you are. It reflects on what you think about things. And I think it has impacts on, you know, on the way you do things as well. You know, the way sometimes when you talk to people, I mean, I think it's important that you keep your individuality. You know, I mean, sometimes you'll hear people, maybe of a working class background, who will speak to somebody middle class on the phone, and they sort of hire their accent a little bit, you know, and try to make it a little bit posher. And I don't agree with that. It's not right. You know, I don't think people would come down to the same level. You know, you do get people on sort of talk shows on the TV that will maybe, you know, that will say come from America, and they'll have another guest on that's from, you know, from maybe the northeast, for instance, where you've got a very strong accent, and there's almost this sort of reluctance to sort of understand them in a way. So I don't know what they're saying, sort of thing. You know, it's nice in a way that they're keeping their individuality and keeping their accent, but there's also an ignorance as well, I think, on other people's side, who, you know, they expect everybody to talk in a, you know, in this sort of Middle England way, and people aren't going to do. You know, your individuality is paramount. You know, you've got to keep that. It's, you know, without that individuality, you're not the person that you are. You know, so it's an important thing. You know, you can't just leave it because everybody else thinks, you know, that's the thing to do and that's the protocol. You know, you've got to keep who you are sacrosanct, I think. You know, and not be something that you're not. You know, I think that's when trouble starts, when you try and, you know, pretend to be something that you aren't. You know, I think honesty is also with a lot of things like that. And, you know, just say it as it is. You know, but be proud of your heritage. You know, be proud of where you come from.
Yeah, you know, I think you're tapping into something that's an absolute fascination, and I've been fortunate to live around the world, and it's one of the particular things about England, you know, this small little rock that we live on, particularly, like you say, we're just the amount of, I mean, for somebody, I mean, some say, I mean, I can, you can almost subscribe what part of Lancashire you're in, and you go, okay, I know he's from Burnley or Preston, and it's amazing how strong that accent is, and I think it's a really, as I say, I think it's a you know, this country is about. But the question to you is, I mean, you know, you obviously got children. I mean, do you think when you know your kids have kids, do you think that if they grow up in your part of the world, do you think there'll still be an accent, or do you think that's going to something that's going to dilute completely with the world we live in, or do you think that will still just continue? Because I'm fascinated by this. I can see it both ways. I can sort of see how we can maybe slip into a future and we all sound the same, and you know, we sort of coalesce into this horrible grey gooey middle bit, or it becomes kind of like what we're seeing with the Gaelic up here, or the Welsh in Scotland, where people are like almost intrinsically going the other way and saying, no, I think there's something to really hold on to this accent, this culture, this. I mean, which way do you think that? I mean, like I say, if you to see your kids when they're, you know, you maybe your age, what do you know, they were having kids themselves, do you think they're you know, your grandchildren or your great grandchildren will have a stronger accent as you will have?
I don't know. I've got a grandchild, actually. I've got a grandson. I think what will affect regional accents and people, the way people talk in general is this sort of text speak thing that's sort of come along, and I've actually heard people say lol, which is a completely bizarre, why you say lol to somebody, is bizarre. But things like that creep into language, people sort of make up words, and I could be very sort of anal and say that, people sort of maybe don't pronounce things properly, but I mean, it's probably being a bit of an arse for saying something like that. But yeah, you can see accents, you can see general conversation disappearing, and I don't just mean by texting and telephones. I think it's the world that we live in. It's becoming very virtual. It's becoming very computer, laptop, tablet, phone orientated. If anything, speech is probably dying out. You can work in an office and you can sort of email somebody who's 6 feet away from you. Where 20 years ago when I was working in an office, heaven forbid you'd actually talk to somebody. You know what I mean? I think, excuse me, I think speech is probably more in danger of disappearing, or becoming very minimal rather than sort of changing to any great degree. But it's an interesting question. It's but I mean, you can sort of move house, and I mean, I've got a son who's 17 now, and he moved from Lancashire down to Tamworth. Don't know, maybe about 5 years ago. But after only being there a few months, he's picking up bits of the accent there. So he's got this Lancashire accent, but he's got little bits of strains of a Midlands accent as well. So it's going to happen, when people move house and accents are going to change. But I think the art of conversation is dying, sort of slow and painful death, I think. But I think probably what you're going to get is just people not talking properly, talking minimally and sending messages to sort of have conversations. It's I don't think the accent could disappear completely. I think you've probably got too much influence from people to, for the accent to totally go. But I think it certainly changes, the way we talk rather than how we talk. I think, it's going to change a lot and has changed a lot.
I completely concur with you, and I think that's one of the beauty things about. That's why I personally found I just completely butted my head against when I went into education, and I felt because they were so rigid in how they saw this the English language. It was like no this, and I was like no, the whole element of this language is it's completely fluid. It's always changing. That's the beauty of it. I don't want some language. It's just if not, we'd all be speaking Latin, and that's what I love about the language. But and I think at times, and I catch myself doing this, and I maybe start to go down these pathways and think, oh, these kids, and look at them all, they're just doing everything in emojis, and and then I think, well, our parents have said that exactly about us lot when we're all writing, things, we're all doing what we're doing, and listen to that kind of music. But I think I think the other way. I tend to think positive side of things, because I think as much as right now everybody it's just like everybody's just got a green light, and that's why I think all these social medias they're just like kids in a playground. Everyone's just got a green light just to go out there and just be virtual signaling, and because they're hidden behind an egg or an acorn or an avatar, they still can just do what they like. But we will grow out of that as a species. But behind that, look at the tools that we've got. That's why I think it's something that me and you particularly can speak upon. As I was saying before we went live, the thought processes, I think now, like some 10-year-old or somebody in their 20s, what they're going to see, what this world's going to be like in 20 years' time, is going to be absolutely immense to them. And I tend to think it's a really positive thing, because I think there's will look to the generation, coming up below them, going, "Oh, these lot are just," you can imagine what it'd be like. Our parents will look at us, our grandparents looked at that and like, "Oh, then smoking hippies all dressing around, listening to that music, and nobody's speaking the Queen's English anymore." And but on the back of it, look at where we've gone. That's what I'm saying. all this doom and gloom about how we're all going to fall apart as a culture, and yet we're speaking to each other through screens, and we're separated by hundreds of miles. And I think this is, I just have an intrinsic. I think there's going to be. I think the way around. I think we're on the brink of a renaissance, or I think personally, I think we're living through a renaissance. And I think just as maybe people walking around 500, 600 years ago would walk around and gone back in time machine and said, do you realize the times you're living in? They're like, what do you mean? Like, you're living in the middle of the Da Vinci and the Renaissance. And they wouldn't have had a clue. It's only till afterwards we look back. And I think that's exactly the folly of humanity a lot. We don't realize how fortunate we are. And that's what I was saying. I think it's one of the great things about when people like yourself do write things and poetry. It's a great thing just to stop and just to take, like you said before, like you said, it's so, you hit now so much on the head when you said it, just to stop and just realize and be thankful and think, wow, I've actually achieved something, I've done something, and how fortunate we all to live in this. And that's why I tend to think, you know, as much as we hear doom and gloom about, you know, this particular generation, I think they've got in their potential, and I think they're going to shift the world completely. And I just think that it's going to be, I think what we're seeing right now is, to me, is a nod. And I just think that the whole thing about, oh, everyone's going down to the emojis and we're just all dumbing down. Yeah, that's everything. But it hasn't every culture, but it hasn't every little culture always done that, and every generation looks down the next generation. But just generally, I think we're just bit by bit, by step, we are progressing as a generation. And man, that's what I'm saying. Look at you must look at your grandchild and think, you know, by the time that kid's 4, he's going to know his way around an iPhone. There's people, I know people my age, dude, in my generation, you must be the same, who still don't know, get their way around a smartphone, and a 4-year-old can. So I think there's great potential coming. I think there's, that's why I always try to look on the positive, because I think us as a species, we are, if we can avoid all killing ourselves and all just, you know, if we can avoid that asteroid hitting and avoid the nature itself that's just trying to destroy us, if we can get through the next 100 years for all those trials and tribulations, I tend to think we'd be in a much better place, because I just think we're just generally evolving. That's with everything. I think, like you're saying, you know, from teenagers, you know, the idea of being depressed was like, that's not, come on, man up. I know there's still that echoes of that now, but look how much our culture's changed. And that's what I'm saying. I think this progression, to me, is I think it's always gone on a good path. That's just my general thoughts.
Yeah, it's like I say, I suppose, you know, are we just sort of reliving the same things that the last generation did, but just in a different format? You know, like I say, I mean, I've a young son as well. He's 22 months old now. But, you know, a few months ago, you know, he'd pick up my smartphone and he'd sort of slide his finger across it. So he knew what to do, you know, sort of 18, 19 months old. But like you say, you know, maybe the kids today, you know, playing with the phones is the equivalent of, you know, of you and I going down to the arcade and playing Space Invaders, you know, and Galaxians and Centipede, you know, those are great games to, you know, and maybe that's the same as, you know, as our parents, I don't know, going to the dance every Saturday night or going to a matinee at the cinema on a Saturday morning, you know, maybe it's just the same thing, it's all reoccurring, but just in a slightly different format. You know, it just happens we have technology now that is beyond, you know, the wildest dreams of people, you know, 20, 30 years ago, but maybe it's just the same thing, but just in a different form. You know, and technology is changing the way we do the same things. Like I say, you know, my mum and dad might have gone out to a dance, you and me might have gone out to an arcade, you know, kids now might go meet on the corner and play interactively between phones, you know. I suppose it's the same thing, but just in a different format, isn't it? You know,
it is. And but the great thing is, and this is just generally, that's why I think, you know, I think it's always a good thing, is just that our boundaries are expanding. If you've gone back, you know, 500-600 years ago, it was all about, you know, fear the person beyond the hill, and then we went beyond the hill and we realized, oh, they're not feared. Then it was fear the person outside our country, and we're just, as a species, we're just putting our tentacles out and reaching each other. And I think that the advancement, the exponential speed that we've gone just in my lifetime, your lifetime, man, where we can have these conversations, and that's the point. You know, when we were in our 20s, the idea of this was impossible. I wouldn't have known someone from outside my town, let alone have a conversation with these things. And I think all the time that us as humans, we start to open up and reach out and touch each other, we all realize that basically we're all the same. I mean, it always breaks down to it. We're all going to shit, repeat. I mean, it's when you really break it down to that, until the day we die. That's if we could all, and that's the thing about when we all reach out and we all start to with this technology, we start to feel each other and understand, all these things. We start to realize that what is the point? And then you start to realize that, like a lot of things, I think it's that whole, you start to realize that we've got so much more in common than the people and the voices that want to send and just divide and distract and put us into categories and say, you're this and you're that. And I think to me, that's why I'm generally very positive, because I think all the time we can just reach out and have these conversations that these tools give us. To me, they're baby steps right now. I mean, that's what I'm saying. Your grandchild's going to look at this in 20 years' time and go, "Oh, Granddad, what were you like sitting there talking to a screen?" It'll seem absolutely alien. But I think, on the other hand, and this is the call I put out to many creative people and people in general. Again, as much as we look back at our grandparents and think, well, how did you walk around slapping women on the arse and calling black people all sorts of names? Hey, we've got the same responsibility on our shoulder. That's our responsibility. Kids are going to look at us and go, you had the opportunity with these tools, and what did you do with it? And that's why that's why I think it's great to that conversations go by. That's why I think it's always good to like I said to you before, raise awareness of what you're doing, spread these words. It's because I think we've got to make use of these tools. Now, as time's flying up to us, and I kind of, where we're at. Just a couple of things. Where can people, I will put links in before, but two things. Where can people reach out to if they want to, reach out to you and follow you and stuff like that? And where can they find, and where can they, sort of go to purchase Hitting the Black Wall? All
right. Well, I've got several Twitter accounts, which is another great thing, I suppose, about Twitter. I have a music blog on Twitter, which is called Higher Pop, which is HIAPOP, and it's actually an acronym for Heaven is a Place on Pendle. There's a hill near us, Pendle Hill, which is, I spent a lot of time up there as a kid, contemplating things and downright feeling sorry for myself. So Higher Pop is an acronym for Heaven is a Place on Pendle. But I have a music blog, which is higherpop.com. I'm on Twitter as Higher Pop, so you can find me there. I had this idea at one point, and I'm not really sure it was a good idea really, but I went with it anyway. I set up a separate sort of poetry separate Twitter thing, and I called it Higher Poetry, which is HIA Poetry. And I like the idea of sort of branding what I did. I'm not sure if it was a good idea, it was a bit of a shit idea, I'm not sure, but again, Twitter, you can find me at Higher Poetry, and you can find a blog which isn't particularly up to date, but it's a blog spot, so I think it's higherpoetry.blogspot.co.uk, but initially the Twitter ones are the ones that I sort of concentrate on, Higher Pop and Higher Poetry. The book, I have a few copies. If people want to get in touch with me, I can autograph some for them. But it is, I'm lucky enough to have it on Amazon. So I just happen to have one here. That's the one. I don't know if you can see that. But that's the book, Hitting the Black Wall, and I'm Paul Scott Bates. My 7-year-old son designed the cover. I don't know if you can see that, Tim. But it's a man.
Your camera's not on, my brother.
Is it not? All right. I won't hand it to them. But you can get the book on Amazon, Hitting the Black Wall. I was just going to say it's got a cover which is designed by my 17-year-old son, and it shows a very muscular man crouching down at a wall. And for a 17-year-old or a 16 when he designed it, his explanation of it was superb for me. He was saying that this man was depressed and hated himself, hated everything about himself, but the only way he could make himself feel good was to try and build up his muscles and build himself up to look like a strong man. But he was sort of having this sort of false persona, you know, of this sort of big tough man, but really he was sort of cowering down and he was very, very afraid. I think for a 16-year-old it was quite something to come out with, so I'm very proud of that cover. So yeah, Twitter Higher Pop, Twitter Higher Poetry, Amazon, the book is available, and please follow me and please message me if you want to have a chat, you know, whatever, you know. It's a great thing about Twitter, you know, you can talk to people, meet people like you know, and meet many, many wonderful people. I met loads of brilliant music people. I've got another sort of plan with my poetry at the moment, which is quite secret. I'll maybe let you know afterwards. Probably people will find out in a few months' time sort of what I got planned. But it's another sort of ambition that I'll hopefully realise in the next few months. So yeah, sort of keep tuned on that one. But I'd love to hear from people, you know, what they think and you know, what they think of what we do. I love music, which is what Higher Pop is. It's a music blog, you know. I review stuff for Louder Than War and then put it up at Higher Pop. I also review for Bodies in the TV, Jay-Z, Dead Albatross, sort of few people. But I'll sort of shove up reviews and I shove up, you know, SoundCloud links and videos of new bands. So again, if there's bands listening, they want a bit of exposure, you know, send it through to me and we'll see what we can do. You know, it's all about sharing, and you know, if I can sort of share somebody's music with somebody, then brilliant, you know. So get in touch. It's good stuff. I want to say actually, Tim, while I've got you, I didn't realise it was you, but I do love the art that you do. I think the art you do is superb. So big up to you as well for some of the stuff. I believe you do the stuff for the Ceiling Demons, or quite a lot of it. But yeah, brilliant stuff.
Well, I think that. Well, thank you very much, and I say this many times, and I think this is the whole. To me, it's the whole great thing about life itself is that we have creative people, and I said, I love listening to their music because as it maybe come out with you in words, it comes out with me in artwork, and that's what I'm saying. That's why I love creative people, because they inspire me. That's why I have conversations like this, and that's why I do all my power to, you know, uplift as many people as possible who are creative, because they're just great inspirations, and I know they're inspiring me. They're going to inspire many people, and that's what it does. Creation inspires. You know, that's what it does. You know, music inspires art. This is what it's all about, and this is the beauty of life. And you know, this is, you know, when you really boil it down to things, and it's, you know, this is what I'm saying. This is what all creative people are. They're poets, they're writers, they're artists. We're just poking that stick in the ego of humanity that thinks it's going to be here and immortal. We're not. We just got a short little time on this thing we call, you know, Earth, this rock that spins through space. We've got a tiny little space of time, and it's what we do with it. And that's why I'm saying it sparks me off, and that's why I feel that, you know, I always try to think we point the direction of people who, you know, spark you off and inspire you. That's exactly, you know, hopefully tonight I'm left with many conversations, you know, the questions tonight, and it's going to inspire me and thinking, okay, it's great. How could it's all part of this beauty thing we call life. Now, as I say, you know, we've run over our time. I want to thank you very much for your time, because I know how much precious. Again, the door's always open, and I definitely think we'll get you back on, because there's so much we could talk about. We've hardly scratched upon we've hardly scratched upon the surface, and hopefully, just to sort of maybe a parting note. I mean, hopefully it wasn't as nervous. I mean, it wasn't as bad as you kind of, you know, as you maybe thought it was, because I know you were kind of like thinking it's going to be dead.
No, it was.
But man, just to sort of, like I say, before we just wrap this up, you know, maybe in just a short paragraph or just a couple of lines, what would be your parting message for anybody that, you know, from this whole conversation?
Well, I think we've probably touched on. I mean, we sort of spoke about my poetry, and I've just sort of mentioned your art, and I think really everybody has something to offer. Everybody has a hidden talent, you know, and they may not think it, and people may think that, you know, that they don't, you know, and that, you know, and they're useless and they're sort of no use. But I think everybody has something, you know, in there, you know, deep in the heart that they are good at and they do excel at. And I think, you know, just try and tap in to what is your talent, because we're all individual, we're all unique, we've all got something to offer. I think if everybody, can unleash, that skill that they have, I think it sounds a bit hippified, but I think the world would be a better place. You know what I mean? I think we've all got something to offer, and I think we all have to remember that. We can all do something for everybody else, and like I say, maybe I'm sounding a bit like a hippie, but it's I do believe in it very strongly. Yeah.
No, I couldn't say any better myself, and I think this is that's excellent way to end this conversation. Well, from all the way over here in Scotland to all the way down there in Lancashire, I want to say good evening and life is people.